Ready for round two. The impeachment investigation into President Donald Trump continues with testimony from the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. We have team coverage. Dangerous waters. An update on the flooding in an Italian city that's threatening dozens of churches. A call to tech companies. Analysis of the Holy Father's attempt to make it impossible for children to find pornography on the internet. And ready to visit. Pope Francis releases a message to the people of Thailand ahead of his trip next week. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, November 15th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Developing tonight, a jury in California finds pro-life activist David Daleiden guilty. Daleiden, head of the Center for Medical Progress, was charged with numerous crimes, including fraud, after the group's undercover video recordings of Planned Parenthood. The videos allegedly show employees discussing the sale of baby body parts. The jury has awarded Planned Parenthood close to $900,000 in punitive damages. On Twitter, Daleiden said in part, justice was not done today in San Francisco. Another key witness testifies publicly in the House impeachment investigation. In the hot seat, the former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. The president this spring ousted her, but today she told lawmakers it was based on false allegations. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with more on this second day of public impeachment hearings. Jason?
Wyatt, Republicans say she should not even be testifying in this impeachment investigation. That's because she admits to not talking to President Trump all year, to not be involved with that July phone call between President Trump and Ukraine President Zelensky. And third, she wasn't involved with withholding aid to that country, all central parts of this investigation.
President Trump removed this woman as his ambassador to Ukraine.
So help you God.
Today, Marie Yovanovitch blames it on a smear campaign, including by Rudy Giuliani.
They shared baseless allegations with the president and convinced him to remove his ambassador.
She shoots down some of those charges.
Also untrue are unsourced allegations that I told unidentified embassy employees or Ukrainian officials that President Trump's orders should be ignored because he was going to be impeached or for any other reason. I did not. And I would not say such a thing.
She's a 33-year veteran of the Foreign Service. She served as ambassador for both George W. Bush and Barack Obama.
Are you a never-Trumper?
No.
President Trump talked about Yovanovitch in his July phone call with the president of Ukraine. The former ambassador from the United States, the woman, was bad news, and the people she was dealing with in the Ukraine were bad news. And President Zelensky said her attitude towards me was far from the best, as she admired the previous president, and she was on his side. She would not accept me as a new president well enough. President Trump responded, well, she's going to go through some things. Today, Yovanovitch reacts.
I didn't know what to think, but I was very concerned.
What were you concerned about?
She's going to go through some things. It didn't sound good. It sounded like a threat.
She claims shady interests around the world learned how little it will take to remove an American ambassador who doesn't do what they want. But Republicans say it's the president's authority to fire ambassadors as he sees fit. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. The White House is responding to Democrats' claim that President Trump was trying to intimidate Ambassador Yovanovitch in the middle of her testimony today. It all started with a single tweet. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham says the president's tweet was not meant to intimidate. The ambassador shared her thoughts, bringing real-time reaction in the hearing room.
Ambassador Yovanovitch, as we sit here testifying, the president is attacking you on Twitter.
2 miles from the Capitol building at the White House, President Trump had just tweeted, "Everywhere Marie Yovanovitch went turned bad. She started off in Somalia. How did that go?"
But would you like to respond to the president's attack that everywhere you went turned bad?
I don't think I have such powers, not in Mogadishu, Somalia, and not in other places. I actually think that where I've served over the years, I and others have demonstrably made things better.
Ambassador Yovanovitch said she believed the effect of the president's tweet was meant to be intimidating. But White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham responded, the tweet was not witness intimidation. It was simply the president's opinion, which he is entitled to. This is not a trial. It is a partisan political process. And President Trump defended his decision to remove Yovanovitch from her post as ambassador to Ukraine, tweeting, the new Ukrainian president spoke unfavorably about her in my second phone call with him. That July phone call is at the center of the impeachment probe. Today, the White House released the transcript of the first call President Trump had with the newly elected leader of Ukraine. He congratulated Volodymyr Zelensky for winning the presidency and closed by telling him, see you soon.
President Trump said he was watching the hearing today. He called it a joke, and he said Republicans have not been given due process. As for that tweet about the ambassador, Democrats say it could become more than witness intimidation and turn into an obstruction of justice charge against the president in this impeachment probe. Wyatt.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. And join me now with her analysis is Kaylee McGhee, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. Kaylee, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
We're now day 2 of public hearings. What's your reaction to the testimony you've heard so far from Wednesday and Friday?
So as of right now, we really haven't learned anything that we didn't already know. So Yovanovitch's testimony, Taylor's testimony, and even Kent's to a certain extent have been leaked. They've been public for a few weeks now. So these testimonies really confirmed the narrative that has already been spun by the Democrats, that Trump put his personal agenda ahead of the U.S.'s political interests.
Well, next week we'll hear from witnesses with firsthand knowledge. We're going to hear from Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindeman, who will be the first witness to testify who was on the line for President Trump's July 25th phone call with the Ukrainian leader. We're also going to hear from the EU ambassador Gordon Sondland, who said he now remembers telling a top Ukrainian official that the release of delayed military aid was likely dependent on the foreign country announcing investigations it would benefit Mr. Trump politically. Now that we're getting into those witnesses, what kind of impact do you think that's going to have?
It'll probably have a much bigger impact than this week's testimony. So the one to really look out for is going to be Gordon Sondland's. We know that he was really an intricate part of the irregular channel that William Taylor talked about on Wednesday. He was involved with Rudy Giuliani, and he played a pretty instrumental role in the investigation into the Biden's corruption or alleged corruption in Ukraine. So it's unlikely that he's going to say much that would incriminate Trump, or even if there is anything to incriminate Trump with. So we might not learn a lot, but the Democrats' questions are certainly going to be a lot more pointed towards him than they were towards Taylor or Yovanovitch.
Given the partisan divide, I should say, over this inquiry, do you think any of this is going to move the needle when it comes to the American people?
Not at all. Impeachment is a political process, and as such, it depends on political opinion. And I think that the vast majority of American people are, to be frank, bored with the proceedings. As I said before, they really haven't learned anything new, and as of right now, it really does appear like this is just another partisan effort to remove Trump from office after he was duly elected in 2016. So unless the Democrats can provide substantive evidence that there was actually a quid pro quo corruption or that there was obstruction of justice, then really this is just a waste of time.
So you think there's any kind of a risk that any of this political situation will result in backlash in the 2020 elections?
It could be that it really motivates Trump's base. Already, it's been a center point for him at his recent rallies, talking about, the continued witch hunt since the end of the Russian collusion investigation. And so it could end up backfiring on the Democrats for sure, but we've already seen that it's also motivated the Democratic voter base. This has been kind of a key campaign point for a lot of the 2020 candidates on the Democratic side as well. So as of right now, it looks like it's kind of fueling the fires on both Democratic and Republican sides without really doing much of substance.
Well, give me both sides here. What would be your advice to both Democrats and Republicans?
So let's start with the Republicans. First, they really should continue to fight this impeachment process based on the facts and not necessarily the process. So we saw even today there was kind of a bit of conflict between Adam Schiff and some of the other Republicans when they tried to interrupt Schiff and put in different points of orders, etc. We need less of that, and we need more of fighting based on the facts that the Democrats are trying to push, because that's what's going to convince people. People don't care about the points of order. They care about whether Trump committed this corruption or not. And to the Democrats, I think that they really need to focus on establishing firsthand knowledge, because as of right now, all of the evidence that's been presented is based on hearsay, and that's not going to hold up, especially not in the court of public opinion.
Okay, well, we're going to be watching this again as this continues next week with more public hearings. Kaylee McGhee, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Yeah, thank you.
Roger Stone, a friend and ally of President Trump, is found guilty of lying to Congress and witness tampering. The verdict came 2 hours after the jury began its second day of deliberations. Stone was indicted in January as part of the special counsel's investigation into Russian election tampering. Stone had denied the charges. It's not clear if he will appeal. Officials say they're looking for a motive in the shooting at a California high school yesterday that killed 2 students.
Our thoughts and prayers, our condolences to all the victims' families, first and foremost. And I want to reassure all the parents of their kids that go to school here in Saugus that we have their safety at heart. It's our #1 priority.
The attack also left several people injured. The 16-year-old suspect shot himself and remains in grave condition. The FBI says there's no reason to believe he was acting on behalf of a group or ideology. They also say there's no indication there were any others helping him. Israel says it has finished carrying out a series of airstrikes on targets linked to Islamic militants. Overnight rocket fire into Israeli communities rattled a ceasefire that lasted roughly 1 day. Israel said it was willing to abide by the truce if there were no additional rocket attacks. There were no reports of casualties on either side. For the 5th consecutive day, anti-government protesters disrupted Hong Kong's central business area. Other demonstrators have barricaded themselves in a university in the former British territory. They're turning the school into an armed camp, and they're preventing police from entering. Security forces say many of the devices the protesters have inside the school are lethal weapons. At least 2 people were killed and 25 others are wounded after confrontation between protesters and security forces in Baghdad. Officials say Iraqi police fired live ammunition and tear gas at the demonstrators. More than 300 people have been killed since protests against government corruption began last month. The Italian city of Venice is tallying up an increasing amount of water damage tonight after high tides surged through the canals. It comes just days after the city suffered its worst flooding in 50 years. Officials closed the city's iconic St. Mark's Square. They're also asking for donations for repairs. More than 4 dozen churches have been damaged. High tide today peaked at 5 feet above sea level. Earlier this week, St. Mark's Basilica experienced heavy damage from the floodwaters. Coming up, we take a closer look at a measure being considered by the Senate that could restrict religious freedom. A member of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom resigns over proposed legislation on Capitol Hill that she says would, quote, gut the organization. In her resignation letter, religious freedom advocate Kristina Arriaga writes, quote, the move towards more bureaucratic controls has undermined the independence of the commissioners to the point I can no longer be an effective advocate for religious freedom. And Kristina Arriaga joins me now in the studio. Kristina, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You served on the commission since 2016. Tell us about this proposed legislation and why it's troubled you to this point.
Every year, the government decides which agencies it's going to fund. And an agency like USERV needs to be funded every 4 years right now. So there was a bill in the Senate to reauthorize to fund USERV, but the bill made fundamental changes to USERV's mission in addition to eliminating the independence of volunteer, unpaid commissioners that serve on USERV like myself.
So what would these proposals, what kind of effect would they have on commissioners?
Oh, enormous effect. For instance, the mission changes to include monitoring and reporting on the abuse of religion in order to violate human rights. What that is code for, what that means is that USERV commissioners and USERV bureaucratic staff would be able to criticize, for instance, conservative churches that will not marry same-sex couples. He would also be able to criticize male circumcision and recommend a ban, as has happened in many countries. This fundamentally creates an ideological loop for commissioners and for the USERV staff, more importantly, to talk about these issues. And that is not what USERV is about. USERV is about monitoring clear cases of violations of religious freedom.
Let me ask this. how much do you think this would change the whole mission of USERF if it were to pass?
Oh, it would destroy USERF. It would make it into an ideological partisan battle. And right now I work with colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, and we focus with laser-like intensity on protecting religious freedom internationally. What this bill also does, it strips away the ability of commissioners to be in charge of the mission of the commission and the direction of the commission. It empowers the staff to monitor the actions of commissioners, even when commissioners are functioning in their private time. So it empowers bureaucrats to control any innovation. And as you know, bureaucracy and innovation don't necessarily go hand in hand.
And I know this can be troubling for not just you, but for so many, because we've interviewed you before on so many important issues. We've interviewed other commissioners, and we're happy to talk to them. And it would be alarming for so many if they were not able to talk as freely as they could about some of these really important issues. You're a longtime religious freedom advocate. I know we're going to continue to talk to you. How are you feeling now that you made this decision to step down?
I was heartbroken that I had to make this decision to step down because I think that USERF has done tremendously great things. I was able to be the first American, for instance, to go and see Andrew Brunson, the American pastor who was imprisoned in Turkey, precisely because as a commissioner, I could push for things to move quickly. And I have seen prison doors open because of op-eds that commissioners wrote, and I have seen a trial in Russia against a religious leader change because of a tweet that USERF sent out. Bottom line is that it's a pity that all of these opportunities will go away if this bill passes.
Like you say, USERF faces this congressional reauthorization. As we watch, and we'll see how all this plays out, what do you think would help USERF to better carry out its mission? What steps do they need to take?
Well, the Senate is currently controlled by Republicans, and it was Marco Rubio who introduced this bill along with other Democrats. I think it's important for people to tell their representatives that USERF is vital for religious freedom around the world, and that people who suffer because of their religious belief deserve much better than a stagnant bureaucracy that will be ineffective.
It's so important that the U.S. does have these representatives talk about these issues. Kristina Arriaga, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective.
Thank you so much.
The Knights of Columbus and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops have sent a message of solidarity to the people of Lebanon and Iraq. The group says it supports efforts to fight corruption and foreign interference. Since 2014, the Knights of Columbus has sent around $25 million to support persecuted religious minorities in those regions. The Knights also support this program. Up next, how the Vatican is fighting internet pornography. And Pope Francis praises the people of Thailand ahead of his visit next week. The Vatican wraps up a two-day meeting on protecting children from internet pornography. The gathering included experts in technology, the media, and religious leaders. Yesterday, Pope Francis told the group everyone has the duty to ensure children have a good life. According to Microsoft, more than 270 images of sexual abuse of minors are uploaded to the internet every day. Kevin Hyland, senior advisor to the Santa Marta Group, joins us from Rome. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us. What was the response from tech representatives about Pope Francis' message regarding pornography?
Well, the tech companies were clear that they're going to try and fight this. They agreed to come together and work collaboratively. And I think what the Pope was saying, or what he was very clear about, was, you know, these are human beings, these are children. You know, he made reference to these are, you know, in the image of God. But he also said, you know, look in the eyes of these children, our sons and daughters. So he made it very human. And, you know, that was something that really was a clear message to them. And I think this, you know, this event has really sent them away with that this is something about human beings. This isn't about profit. This isn't about, you know, how you kind of work around this, how you negotiate around it. This is about, you know, saving children and actually protecting them from, you know, some of the most dangerous people in the world.
And certainly there's more work to be done on that end. But in the meantime, what is being done already by tech companies to stop child exploitation and to prevent children from being able to access pornography online?
Well, they gave examples of things they're doing, education programs. Some of it was about, you know, the education of children in schools, of parents, so they better understand what the risks are, creating tools that need to be implemented and can be used by families and parents. But I think overall what we did discover were that things are far short from where they need to be. A lot of the things that are being done are, reacting after the exploitation has happened or in response to it, as opposed to, what we were trying to get to, which is about a lot more prevention, stopping it from happening in the first place.
So just to follow up on that, are there any other main obstacles to protecting children online? You mentioned education as one of them.
Yes, and of course, all sorts of children are exploited online. It could be children in in our well-developed cities and towns of the United Kingdom, the United States, Australia, but also it's children who are in far distant shores, Southeast Asia and beyond. So, it's very complex. But I think that, what we do need to do is we need to see far more investment. We were talking today about profit and the amount of profit that companies make, as opposed to how much they invest in preventing this. So that's something we've really talked about, is how can we actually get to the heart of preventing this and not making this, an easy means to view children and exploit them online. The fact that, people could go online, whether it's in London, Dublin, New York or Sydney, and order a child and then see a child abused online is absolutely abhorrent. And, one of the terms used today was, these new highways, these internet highways, need to be patrolled and managed like other highways. So we need far more prevention. We need to stop them being used in the first place. And, something that came out of the event was the technology could be there to do that.
Very interesting. And obviously, I know it's difficult to predict the future, but is there any other concrete action we can expect to see out of this conference, Kevin?
Well, the Pope was very clear about people need to work together. And he spoke very much about collaboration. And that was really, clear and important. And there does need to be collaboration. But there were a number of steps that were agreed. But one of the things that was really, brought to the fore by particularly the Chancellor of the Academy, Marcelo Sanchez Sorondo, the resident bishop, he actually said about we do need legislation and we do need policy. And I think that was something that really came home today, that, the businesses, a lot of them want it. They want there to be regulation. They want a level playing field. And we need to work with them to establish what that is.
Such a vital message and such an important topic in this day and age. Kevin Hyland, Senior Advisor to the Santa Marta Group, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Finally tonight, Pope Francis sends his greetings to the people of Thailand ahead of his visit next week.
Tailandia ha trabajado mucho para promover la armonía.
The Holy Father calls Thailand an example of a country that promotes harmony and peaceful coexistence. And he says it's an inspiration to people around the world. Francis' visit to Thailand and Japan will be his 32nd apostolic journey. And you can trust we'll be following along all the updates on the Holy Father's trip and continue to bring you the day's highlights right here on EWTN News Nightly. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. For the entire News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.